Sand King's ultimate Epicenter seems pretty straightforward, but there are a number of interesting mechanics behind it that are often overlooked by the chaos it brings. Today, we're going to go over the deeper mechanics of Epicenter so you know how it actually works. Epicenter is Sand King's ultimate. After a 2-second cast point, he deals magic damage and applies a movement and attack slow to enemies around him. The damage and debuffs follow him, making this a very powerful initiation tool. As you can probably tell, Epicenter unleashes pulses around Sand King while it's active. The higher level Epicenter, the more pulses. But how do these pulses actually work? Epicenter has a base radius of 500, so it doesn't matter if an enemy is right on top of Sand King or if they're at the max base radius of 500. They'll be taking the same amount of damage in either spot. The cool thing about this 500 radius though is that it actually increases throughout the Epicenter's duration. For every pulse, Epicenter's radius increases by a small amount. The base radius for every level of Epicenter starts at 500, and after each pulse the radius increases by 13. So by the time it reaches the final pulse of, let's say, a level 1 Epicenter, the radius goes from 500 to 656, which is actually the radius it shows when you hover over the spell. For a level 3 Epicenter, it starts at again 500 and ends with a 760 radius. So just know that the longer Epicenter goes on, the larger area it covers. Sand King currently has a level 20 talent that directly affects the radius value and how much it changes by. It increases the base radius by 100 and increases the incremental value by 12. So before, the radius started at 500 and increased by 13 for every pulse. After getting this talent, it starts at 600 and increases by 25 for every pulse. So before, we said a level 3 Epicenter would start at 500 and end with a 760 radius. Well, now it'll start at 600 and end with a whopping 1100 radius. And I just want to remind you that even though a unit is technically in the max radius that Epicenter will be hitting, if they're at the very edge of it, they won't be taking much damage at all due to the way Epicenter expands outward before stopping. Each pulse of Epicenter does a certain amount of magic damage depending on its level. A level 3 Epicenter has 20 pulses, each doing 80 damage, dealing a total of 1600 magic damage. Sand King has two ways you can increase this damage. His Aghnim shard, which raises the damage per pulse by a small amount, and his level 25 talent, which gives him additional Epicenter pulses. Even though Epicenter's duration stays the same as 6 seconds, with this talent it packs all of these additional pulses into those 6 seconds, making Epicenter much more devastating. The max damage a level 3 Epicenter does before reductions without this talent is 1600, and after the talent it's 2400. And remember that every time Epicenter pulses, it increases the radius by this incremental value. So although this talent doesn't technically increase Epicenter's max radius, it effectively does. Before, it would reach a max 760 radius with the 20 pulses, but now with 30 pulses, it reaches 890. And if you combo all of these pulses with the level 20 talent we went over earlier, you can reach a max radius of 1350, which is huge. And it can get even larger with a Bloodstone, making it 1425. And if you subscribe right now, the next Epicenter you cast will instantly kill any enemies it touches. If you don't believe me, try it out yourself. Epicenter also applies a movement slow and attack slow to units it hits, making it harder to escape from and fight into. These slows have a lingering debuff duration of 3 seconds. If Sand King dies while Epicenter is active, Epicenter will continue where Sand King died until the duration is over. So sometimes if you can get it off before dying, it can still help your team out in a fight. We already went over his Aghnim shard upgrade a bit, but we didn't cover everything. As we mentioned, it increases the damage per pulse by a small amount. The other thing it does is create a single Epicenter pulse around Sand King every 3.5 seconds, but only if there's an enemy within a 425 radius of him. If you have the level 20 talent, which increases the base radius of Epicenter by 100, that also applies to this single pulse radius, making it 525. And with Bloodstone, it can reach a 600 radius. The thing about this shard is that the 3.5 seconds runs on an interval. So if an enemy moves out of the radius at the 3.5 second mark every time, they'll never get hit by the passive pulse. That also means that if an enemy moves into the radius right at the 3.5 second mark, they'll be hit right away. Playing around this is probably not too easy since the interval is always going and the pulse doesn't happen unless an enemy is nearby, but it's still an interesting mechanic to know about. Now let's talk about Sand King's Aghanim Scepter upgrade, which adds even more chaos to an already devastating ultimate. With the Aghs upgrade, when Epicenter begins, 3 Stinger attacks spawn every 0.5 seconds at random locations within the current pulse radius. These Stinger hits deal 50% of the Stinger damage. And if you have the Shard upgrade, it creates 1 Stinger attack for every passive pulse. One of the cool things about the Stinger hits is that their size scales with the expanding radius of Epicenter. Each one is 15% of the current Epicenter radius. As the radius expands over the 6-second duration of Epicenter, so does each Stinger attack radius. So for a level 3 Epicenter with no talents affecting it, it has a starting radius of 500 and a max radius of 760, meaning the first Stinger hit will have a 75 radius, and once it reaches its max radius at the end of the duration, the Stinger hits will have a radius of 133. And if you have everything needed to get that huge Epicenter radius we saw before, and you had this Aghs upgrade, the Stinger attacks would have a huge radius, going from 101 at the start of Epicenter all the way to 213. Stinger technically performs an attack on enemies in the area, so the more right-click damage you do, the more damage the Stinger hit will do. And Stinger applies a movement slow as well, so combo that with the movement slow from Epicenter and enemies around you are going to have a really hard time getting away. If I missed anything you think is noteworthy about Epicenter, be sure to let all of us know in the comments so we can all learn and become better players. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps let YouTube know that it should show it to more people. If you want to watch me live and ask me any questions during my games, be sure to check out my Twitch and join our community Discord to chat with others and see when I go live. Shout out to all my patrons for their continued support: Tilted Ward, The Titanforge, Mark, Aaron, and Ole, and all of the free members. If you want to work with me to review your games and figure out where you can improve to finally reach your MMR goals, go check out my Patreon where I offer that. If you enjoyed learning about the mechanics behind Epicenter, you might like this other video where I do the same for a different spell, or this whole playlist of videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I hope you learned something new with me.